as well. And also we're going to be joined by Brian Fitzpatrick. Brian, if you want to come up from Fitzpatrick Advisory. It's interesting actually, one of the things here, environment and climate change missing from biggest challenges list. And we'll come on to what you've been talking about in a second, John, because obviously this affects local roads and it affects, funding of local roads and so on. But Brian, as you're kind of new to the panel, we'll kick off with you. What have you made of what you've heard so far this morning about the sort of funding for local roads and the issues there, about how prepared we are for the weather that's coming along in the future, and about the role perhaps a highways sector deal could play in all of that?
I just introduced myself from a local authority background. I've been a client, a consultant, an independent councillor, and even a mayor. So I'd like to think that in terms of local authorities in the highways world, I'm well rooted in that practice and execution of stuff. So when I hear people talk about the highways deal, obviously very supportive. When I hear people talk about the construction deal and the ask, highways maintenance per se on its own doesn't get mentioned. And the issue for me, where I start from, in local authorities and the highways maintenance, the local authority, maybe not a county council, but maybe a London authority, is the construction sector ask, as I understand it, is because it's only 40% productive. So up to 60% by virtue of the inverse of that is wasted effort, or could be wasted effort. And highways maintenance is an analogous sector. Lots of the same firms are doing the same work and the same processes. So a lot of effort is wasted potentially. And the construction sector deal is about, or one of the themes about remedying that situation is about going digital and actually making sure that people can apply their line of sight digital information processes to the execution of their works. And there's huge benefits. So I hear about the productivity gains that we could get from highways maintenance stuff, but I feel that some of that stuff is slightly being ignored. And the issue for me as well, in terms of the technology impact that we saw on the slide as well, that I'm seeing and being witness to now changes in technology that could totally disrupt the supply chain, totally change the highways maintenance contracts, which at the moment is a very cost-driven, resource-intensive business. Sometimes people call it a race to the bottom. So what I want from the sector deal is actually almost a higher recognition of the role that technology and digital could play in resetting the sector, catalysing a change in the behaviours and the accountabilities, and actually also elevating the role of the highways engineer or the discipline specialist in the highways to that of authentic network managers, which brings us back to John's presentation and about being ready to adapt to the future demands on that network from climate change and CAVs and electric vehicles and everything else. And finally, I've just done some of this work and we posited 2035, and if we work backwards from 2035, what needs to be true now in our industry to make operations in 2035 optimal for the user. And people have heard me bang on about this before. The road isn't the customer is the customer, right? So we should be starting to think about the expectations of the people in terms of mobility, the demands on our infrastructure that we placed on it by CAVs, and the spatial demands as we switch from fossil fuels to battery charging, etc., EVs and stuff. So I want, and I know this eminent panel have got all that. I know you've got all that. But actually, sometimes there feels to be a slight disconnect from what's going on in the ground, where they haven't got enough money, and they don't get many capital schemes. It's all on maintenance, and we can't afford to do it. And the processes they use, and the complaints procedure that gets circuitously wound around the council before we can respond. So I think there's a massive response potentially from us, which could hopefully support a lot of the arguments being made on the panel. I'll shut up now.
Well, I think we'll talk in a second about the practical short-term stuff with local roads, about sort of funding and longer-term funding and structure and all the rest of it. But let's stick with the idea of technology just for now, and the role that could play in sort of helping us combat climate change and how you would fund it and so on. I mean, keep referring to the rail deal, but it is interesting to have someone here who's done a deal already. What role did digitalisation was big in that deal, I know. What role can technology play? I mean, just out of interest, actually, Brian, what sorts of technologies are you talking about? Is this sort of big league, very expensive stuff? Or can you give us any practical examples?
In the guts of a highways authority, there's a load of proprietary systems that don't talk to each other. Okay, so, and for commercial reasons, and licensing and everything else, it's not a very cost-efficient way. And even the institutions that we work with, I mean, there's a difference of opinion about the value of something called the UK pavement management system, and whether or not all these disruptive technologies, for example, where you can pick up road condition from the windscreen of your car, will actually educate a highways authority where their issues are. But if you had to chuck that data into UK PMS, you then start to have to worry about the quality, the depth of the pothole, the size, the dimensions, all these different attributes that get spit out and inform your rehabilitation program. So these new data collection techniques are not accredited to PMS, and so there's a trouble reconciling the old legacy mandates from DFT about KPIs and systems and processes compared to the issues that you can resolve now from just cars acting as sensors, for example. And one of the things that we're trying to do is, okay, accept that. I mean, I was brought up in the 80s when we knew what the answers were, we just didn't have the technology to do it. Now we've got the technology to do it. So if you can accept that and say there's going to be a lot of systems, proprietary systems hanging around, then why don't we find a better way to connect them all up? And actually you can do that quite cost effectively in the cloud. And so there's quite a lot of technologies that need to be connected up and for low cost sort of provide better information in terms of execution, decision making and maintenance.
Yes, Neil, you want to add something?
Can I build on that from a slightly different perspective? So, what's the outcome we want to achieve with our local roads or our strategic roads? We're hearing that we have a rising political concern and community concern around the quality of our environment, carbon, natural capital, that kind of stuff. We are at an interesting point in our economy and our wealth generation as a nation as we exit Europe, and we've got to think really skillfully around how we position our economy and our wealth generation, because we all like being wealthy, right? Because it enables us to do things we want to do. And we've ducked in and out through skills, the whole kind of societal thing. You know, we here are, so if you wrap that up, our investment in assets, either new or maintaining, is really about driving better social, economic and environmental outcomes. So if that's our goal, do we understand that? Have we got the data and evidence to understand? Do we capture the right data? Have we got the insight? Do we analyze that data to ensure that every day when we maintain our assets, we're delivering those social, environmental and economic outcomes? We do not. That's not the way we think, for starters. We don't capture the data every day. Increasingly, there is real-time data out there. We're awash with it. Yeah. Anyone's got a mobile phone on, you're generating real-time data. Are we utilizing that to drive our investment, our operational, our planned maintenance regimes, our reactive planned maintenance regimes, what we do with our people and our plant? Probably not. So I think I was personally disappointed in the data response. That's what I meant by data. It's capturing information and knowledge and using it creatively, increasingly in real time, to drive the right outcomes, the right investment strategies and so on. Until we do that, we'll be inefficient and unproductive.
Martin, you want a quick point?
Again, building on that, this focus around outcomes, I think, is really important for us. We heard yesterday, we had Steve Gooding from the RAC Foundation just reminding us what we all know anyway, that this is a complex industry in which we work. We're having to juggle different challenges and different tensions. But coming to the point that you've mentioned a couple of times, Richard, in terms of the Slido conversations about environment and climate change, for me, this is where focusing on what do we want to achieve as an outcome, using the insight that technology and data provides us, but recognizing that the need for change is now. I live in Oxford. I was staggered to realize that the average temperature in Oxford is already 1.6 degrees higher now than it was at the end of the 20th century. So as John has illustrated, this is not something that's academic, it's happening now, the consequences are now. The challenge for us is balancing, as I said earlier, that desire for growth, for prosperity, with the need to reduce the environmental impact and the consequences that has in terms of climate change and everything else. And that's really difficult stuff, which is where we will get into the political environment. But we as a profession have an opportunity to rise to this challenge and then offer solutions. Offer solutions about how we come together to put forward a proposition that will allow the difficult decisions to be made, that allows the investment in roads where we need to, because you need that investment to support that prosperity and economic activity, but to change the nature of our transport system more fundamentally so we reduce the environmental impact.
Anna, I came to you a little bit earlier and you didn't get a chance to answer, but I will ask you again. I mean, someone's put here, how would a sector deal mainstream a rethinking of our response to climate change? I mean, you've had some experience of negotiating a sector deal. You're the only one here that has. What role did future technology play? What role did the climate change play in doing that deal? And what could a deal potentially do in terms of focusing minds a little bit on these issues?
Okay, there are three questions there, so I'll try and do one at a time, and I'll do them quite quickly. So they all played a key theme in the rail sector deal, and our sector deal was called One Railway Digitally Connecting the Nation. And digitally connecting the nation means the operational effectiveness of the railway, but also the support that we give to our customers to help them plan their journeys better, essentially. So data and technology played a really, really important part. So as part of our sector deal, what we negotiated is a level of match funding with government to help us build a data portal for rail. And obviously I can spend a lot of time going through the detail, but again, that was real transformative to have the Department of Transport support us and help us look at what we can do to make better use of data. Lots of sectors have lots of data, but is it open? Is it freely available? How do we use it? So the sector deal looks at that particular activity. Technology, I'll try and do one at a time. Technology, absolutely. So as part of implementing digital railway, clearly there's going to be a shift in terms of what you need around the digital aspects of what we need to do. And that's not just the railway, that's the rolling stock and all the activity. So what we looked at is how best that we can do that with the client organisation and the public sector. As part of the rail supply group and the rail sector deal, we also looked at academia and the support that they could help around technology, research and development. And there was an organisation born from the rail supply group and the rail sector deal called UKRIN. And basically they are the academia looking at 5 key components around how we drive innovation, technology, and almost look at positive disruption. So you'll be pleased to know there are a number of environmental activities that are going on as part of UKRIN already in terms of making a more sustainable, i.e. green, environment way forward for rail. And there was a third one, so data, technology, what was the third
one? I guess it was the role that a deal like this can focus minds. As you know, it's done it for railway, can it do it for roads as well?
It absolutely can, but it requires the whole sector to come forward and work together in a very collaborative way and understand what your key priorities are. I would honestly give you the best possible advice I could. Less is more when negotiating a deal. Don't try and take too much. Just take the things that are really important for you to have certainty, confidence, and to flourish your businesses of what you need to do to succeed in highways. Would you mind if I just answer that top question? Because I keep seeing the number going up and up and up. And it's a really important one. How can SMEs feature more strongly in developing strategies? And that's a really good question. So as part of the deal that I personally co-led and negotiated, SMEs were very, very important to me. And SMEs are a large proportion of the existing rail supply chain. So we set up a governance structure where we asked a call for all SMEs to come forward, give us their views, give us their thoughts, help us shape what the offers and asks could be part of the overall plan. And as a result of having the input from SMEs, we ended up securing a deal with government that had a whole pillar around SME growth and how we help them in terms of shared apprenticeships, what we do with certainty, looking at how we can have a scorecard to make sure that principal contractors and the client organisations help and support SMEs. So SMEs are going to be absolutely vital for a deal, and you won't secure one without SMEs.
Just quickly, if there are people here from SMEs, what do they physically do practically at the moment? Do they wait to see who's sort of leading the sector deal and then get in touch with them, or what would? Yeah, John.
So I actually have found over the last 3 years the work that we've been doing on resilience. It's actually brought a lot of the SMEs to the table. So we've got companies. Geist, Yotta, as well as some of the traditional sort of Transport Research Laboratory, TRL, and their resilience shift work. It's actually found, for me, a real mine of high-quality data that does exist within our local authorities. We do have that, and actually, those authorities that have been pushed to the brink in terms of assets that have failed or are failing, they're now using predictive systems to say, right, okay, how can we actually understand the importance of networks? Not just the road network upon something that we drive, but the 25 or 35 bits of fibre optic, power, communications, gas networks that lie beneath. So we need to actually look at this and reposition a sector deal that does tap into the energy and the innovation, and there is some fantastic novel approaches that I think should be centre stage across the country and across the globe, frankly. We are recognising early, and it is still early, and we still do have time to be able to get our teams to rethink when they are out and about, what are the telltale signs, what do they need to look, what do they need to look for. So a sector deal will give context and structure to that and should hopefully bring additional funding. But right now, it's about each authority using the data in terms of the DFT incentive funding, in terms of what is their state of preparedness for resilience. It should no longer be a tick box. What assets are they using? What are they using to actually test the impact of 30% more flood or 30% more heat? These are new asks of local authorities. It will come with a bit of a price tag. I think it needs to be described within the highway sector deal, but we need to put the communities front and centre, because that is what ultimately we are there for, to provide and preserve networks upon which utilities can flow and people can travel.
Brian and Neil, I know you both want to make points, and saying just very quickly, Anna, if someone's in an SME, what do they do? Do they wait to see who's kind of leading the sector deal and then literally email them or get in touch with them? What do they do practically?
So at the moment, today's session was just really to talk to you about some of the great exploratory work that we're doing. So behind the scenes, what we're trying to do is set some governance and some structure around to make sure that if we do want to drive this forward, you're able to contact and participate. So at the moment, if we could just pause and just wait a month or so, we will come out with a structure. And it's important that you participate, because it will be your deal, not just a few of us here, and it really is important to have your participation of what we do and how we do it.
Brian, I'll come to you. Well, yeah, you go for it, and then Neil.
Okay, so I just want to take on the fragmentation of the industry to start with. So I work in a number of local authorities in London. I didn't know that you're leading a sector deal and that we can contribute in that way. And it's important to understand that local authorities, especially in London, are 33 different villages. 32 or whatever, they are very politicised, they are very aware of, I'm not going over there because they do it wrong over there, very insular to a degree. So this collaborative thing that Neil's talked about and everything else is compounded by the fragmentation of the industries, the different institutions that are leading it. That's why this panel, I'm absolutely convinced, talking about this thing is the right thing to do. And that leads, as I say, to the opportunities to start to address some of the funding issues and the systemic issues that might arise. And just in terms of SMEs and everything else, and how you might put it together, I think there should be a contribution around the technology stuff. There are so many firms out there who are capable of doing some fantastic stuff, but they meet, as I say, this institutional barrier or this policy barrier or this technical gate that they have to go through that no one's given them guidance about anymore. So my plea is, and where I'm getting all on your nerves, is that I think there's another bit of outreach to do to try and bring people with, and actually that and then speaking with one voice, you can define the ask better, and we can deliver and get more money.
Neil, you had a.
Yeah,
You've been waiting a while. No, just Neil. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, as people have been talking, it was triggered by the SME debate, and absolutely the SME sector, who by their very nature tend to be a bit more fleet of foot, a bit more vibrant, a bit more entrepreneurial. That is not to say the big players are not, but I think SME have a critical role to play, and we do need to find a way of building them in. But it was getting me thinking around, so what is the sector? We've probably got, we could very clearly come to the sort of the core of what it is, but I think as we stretch our minds today, the sector does actually have fuzzy edges, and when we put the team together as a deck for the live lab pitches, we very aggressively brought in a tech company or a telecoms company called O2. They've been a fantastic strategic partner in developing our think around innovation in highways issues on the ground. ADET last year showcased at least a half a dozen entrepreneurial SME companies as part of their annual conference, and it's triggered a whole series of connections with commissioners of highway services. So the more I talk about it, the more I get excited. I don't look like it, but I'm really excited around the prospect and the absolute need to make this happen. The trick is, in the coming days and months, have we got the appetite to think about the unthinkable and then actually turn it into action?
John, you want to make one?
Yeah, I just want to come back on the issue of fragmentation, to be honest, because I think it's recognised that, yes, there are 154 highway authorities, there's 33 London boroughs. Well, I meet those London boroughs on a regular basis. I go to London councils to talk with them about these very real issues. We have got the preeminence of ADEPT. We've got new organisations such as LCRIG. We've got LG Tag as a national body. But interestingly, across the range of these bodies, including the CIHT and ICE, there is a massive amount of work doing. And actually, I would be amazed if actually there wasn't a single council director who wasn't in one of those networks. And I think this is the importance of a sector deal, because it provides a unifying force, frankly, to lance that myth that we are fragmented. Because actually, when I look around here, there is a range of different authorities here, and I know that they're all participating in either CIHT stuff, ADEPT stuff, LG Tag stuff, and I think the sector deal is about actually setting the record straight on that and showing how we are really informed by modern data capture systems, and we're exposing ourselves to customer challenge. Over 100 authorities every single year go out through the National Highway and Transportation Survey to say to the customers, what do you think? Those results are coming out soon, and I think it's going to be quite interesting feedback, to be honest. So I think it is a case that we all of ourselves need to actually get hardwired into some of the work that is happening, and actually through the sector deal, get behind it.
Martin, I've got a question for you. Someone's put in here, sort of glasses go up. Do you think that actually should be a single strategic voice of the sector? I think we've all answered that. If so, who? Or is that what a sector deal is, basically? Because you're never really going to get one overarching bodies, but you can have a sort of single voice to go and negotiate this deal.
So again, and actually just building on from John's last point, I get the opportunity to meet with a number of our corporate partners. I know all institutions have corporate partners, but I happen to have a chance to meet with them only beginning of last week. And what I was struck by is exactly what John was saying. You know, it's fundamentally the kind of issues we're talking about within their businesses as individual businesses are driving their forward approach. These are bottom line issues for them. They are doing it because it makes good business sense as well as being a good technical and professional sense. What I saw in that conversation, or what I heard in that conversation, is that point, a recognition, and this is at the chief executive levels of our corporate partners, the benefit of coming together and sharing that voice and speaking with one voice. What that looks like, Anna's talked about how, you know, these are very early conversations with soft market testing, because frankly, there's no point the three of us standing up here and saying, it's a good idea, we're going to do it, if actually the industry isn't prepared, recognizes the issue, and prepared to actually move forward. I think we've seen through the conversation today and those conversations that there's an appetite for it. We need to put together some structure, some governance, as Anna's talked about. We need to make sure that's as inclusive of the new types of perspectives and skills, because absolutely the innovation that's coming through the SME and the smaller companies and the innovators is fundamental to the future. And I think we collectively need to shape this. We collectively need to choose how we want to present ourselves to the government and those that we are trying to influence. And from that will come the leadership that we require.
I like all that, I love all that, I know all that, but when it comes to talking about collaboration, and we want to collaborate with a long-term maintenance partner, and we're going to get into an 8-year deal, right? But they're supposed to bid almost retrospectively in terms of the maintenance activity that they used to know and they used to be able to price. How are they going to get innovation in? How are they going to deal with some of the challenges and techniques of condition data collection? And how are we going to pronounce that's going to happen over the course of an 8 to 10 year contract? And so these are the sorts of issues that need to be teased out. The devil is in the detail, but those are the things. Councils are reletting 8-year tenders tomorrow. And yet the maintainer will then find himself commercially disadvantaged and technically disadvantaged, and there's a huge reset. So all I'm saying is I think, I am echoing all the things here, but just take a pause actually and say that the opportunity is bigger to reset at a much more detailed level than perhaps, and I'm being unfair perhaps to the short airtime that we've had. Sorry, Neil.
So on some of the slide down drop boxes, there was a question around the new business model, and I think it scored the least.
Yeah, I know.
The new business model is actually the new commercial relationship between the people that hold the money, the state, local government, and the people that deliver the services. When I was president of ADET, one of the most consistent messages I got from the commercial sector and from local authority commissioners is the way we procure and contract is poor. And we need to reinvent that. I call it a business model because it's not just about procurement and contracts. It's take a step out. It's the fundamental relationship to be built between a supply chain, a commissioner, around environmental, economic, social outcomes, the maintenance of asset, the financial framework, where the risk is shared, and so on. So we have to reinvent that business model, and that's actually one of the work streams in the sector now.
It's pretty much what Neil said. So we have had some exploratory discussions. So I take on board your comments around procurement certainty. So what we did at the outset, just to give you an idea for rail rather than replicate for highways, is we had a very close relationship with the client organisations and some of the key stakeholders around understanding how you could change the dynamics of procurement, what you could do around your control period funding. So something that came through on rail, and I'm sure that they won't mind me saying it, is they agreed a settlement for SOFA of say 48 billion for the control period, and they never asked a single person in the supply chain whether it was achievable, deliverable, affordable. And again, what the sector deal did was actually say, stop, what we want to do is we could probably do less for more. Help us drive different ways of working and innovation. So what you'll now see with some of the big client organisations in rail, Rome wasn't fixed in a day, by the way, that they've started to think differently about how they engage with the supply chain to make sure that they get it right next time and based on the lessons learned.
Just out of interest, someone said to me yesterday, roads will be much more complex than rail because obviously there are, you've got Highways England, but there are all these local authorities as well. I mean, that seems like common sense, really. This is going to be more tricky than the rail deal.
So every sector would say that they're special. I agree, highways is slightly more complex than rail because of the activity that you have with local authorities, but equally it gives you an opportunity to look at how you can come forward together as a consistent voice on some of the key areas that you want.
I do want to finish with a sort of governmental kind of question. John, I'll throw this one at you. There's kind of been rumours and mini announcements that the government might start looking at local roads in terms of long-term funding. But then we've gone into an election campaign, and obviously no one can talk at this event because of PERDA and so on. How vital is that long-term funding? It was the #1 priority of everyone here. And how likely is it, do you think, that the government's actually going to apply what they do for the strategic roads to local roads?
So as a sector, local government has been consistent that having clarity over a 3 to 5 year period or longer is the single biggest requirement across every aspect of local government, frankly, and highways is no different from that. We do things radically different. I've worked in authorities that do operate short-termism, that they operate literally 1 year at a time. It is transformational when you go into authorities that actually do have a 3 to 4 year rolling plan where they can actually say, we're not going to respond here, but we promise you we will respond to you the year after because we have a clear, consistent and transparent plan. And the DFT do expect that of us within scoring of the highway assessment incentive funding. The importance of a forward plan is recognised by DFT, and I think DFT are fighting the good fight with Treasury, and there's now growing traction for it. But I think that a highway sector deal will really give some go faster stripes to that.
But just to say, I mean, this was a subject of a conversation with the Transport Select Committee earlier this year. CIHT, along with a number of other organisations, gave evidence. I think we saw the report from the committee earlier this year. But what was even more encouraging was the recognition in the response from the department that these are themes they want to work with the sector on. So I think once we get over the next 4 or 5 weeks and we have an incoming government, I think we've got an evidence that we've gone through the Transport Select Committee, we've seen the advice being made by the committee, and a very encouraging response from the department that they recognise that this is an issue to be tackled.
Well, thank you all very much for a very vibrant debate, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the sector deal develops, and people here can keep an eye on it and contribute, hopefully. But I think you've got your messages across. So.